First round rookie picks are like the cake, but second round picks are the icing. So today we are talking through trading away your second round rookie picks and what you can get in return if you are rebuilding or contending. Let's start it off here, Addison, with the 201 to the 204. If you're competing, some guys around the value on Keep Trade Cut are Chuba Hubbard, George Kittle, Davante Adams, Mike Evans, Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, David Montgomery, and Chris Godwin. What are your kind of thoughts here if you're trying to compete with these guys?
The very interesting thing is, like, if you have this pick range, but you are trying to compete, I think that is probably an interesting pick in terms of, should you actually use it on a rookie, or should you try and trade that away for an actual productive player to help you compete? Because this kind of range, especially in Superflex leagues, is pretty interesting in terms of the spillover that could happen from the first round. Because I've done a couple mock drafts. I did a landing spot mock draft, and like the 201 in my landing spot mock was Emeka Egbuka. The 202 was Matthew Golden. Like, those were top 35 overall draft picks in that mock draft, just because of how much talent that we have at the running back position. You got 2 tight ends thrown in there, 3 quarterbacks thrown in there. Jackson Dart could even be potentially in this range, depending on where he lands. Like, this is not a bad range to have if you still are looking for a good rookie. But if you're competing, I think a lot of these players are going to be very helpful for you in 2025. I don't know if they have, the most longevity, but, some of these guys I think are really good bets for 2025. And then a couple of them I think could continue on being good bets in 2026. Not sure about 2027, but these are the group of players that I would love to try to see if I could pull away from other contending rosters with that early second, especially from contending teams that maybe they're trying to start to age down, that appreciate that extra second round pick, that rookie player, and you can add one of these very productive players onto your competing roster.
100%. And I love Chuba Hubbard here starting it off. I mean, he's still only 25 years old, overall RB19 on Keep Trade Cut, and he got the long-term extension. We also got Jonathan Brooks, who is down again with an ACL injury. And so we'll have to see what they do in the draft, but I really love Chuba Hubbard if you need some RB production. Now, we were talking before recording about Davante Adams and Mike Evans. So I kind of wanted to talk through this on right now on Keep Trade Cut. Mike Evans is ahead of Davante Adams, but we were saying, hey, if you're looking at it for next year's sake, Davante Adams might be ahead of Mike Evans in a lot of people's redraft rankings. So I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts around Davante Adams versus Mike Evans in this range.
I do kind of had this ordered in terms of, like, these are the players that I would order if I had a 201, the 202. I'd go down this list. And so we do have Davante Adams ahead of Mike Evans. I initially did have Evans above Adams, just because that's also kind of how Keep Trade Cut had it. And I thought that it would probably be easier to get Adams than it would to get Evans. But I think I would just rather have Davante Adams, because, like you said, like, if Matthew Stafford really keys in on him, I mean, that's a role, even with Puka there. We saw even last year before the final, like, 4 games of the year, Cooper Kupp was still putting up, like 15, 16, 17, 18 PPR points, on the regular with and without Puka Nacua. And it's not like Puka has been the most healthiest player over the past couple of years and even down into college. So if there's an opportunity where Davante Adams has like a month without Puka in 2025, that's phenomenal. But Mike Evans, I mean, he just does it every single year, and he's probably just going to continue on doing it, even without Liam Cohen anymore. It's still Baker Mayfield throwing in the ball. Chris Godwin is going to be coming back from the injury, so he might be slow to start, leaning more on Mike Evans. I think you wouldn't be sad if you're able to trade an early second for either one of those guys. It's just, can you trade an early second for either one of those guys in your league?
Now, we did throw in some rebuilding assets, which is kind of contradictory to what we may say, as you should probably, for rebuilding, just take the pick, take the upside shot. But if you wanted a younger term asset, we put some guys in the range of like a Chris Olave, a Jalen Waddle, a Khalil Shakir, Josh Downs, Jaden Reed. So I kind of wanted to start this off with you, because when we're looking at the wide receiver landscape in this draft, I know your marker system, there's some guys at the top, but it's not really deep. So if you can trade one of those early seconds for a guy like a Chris Olave or Jalen Waddle, I think we both agree we should be doing that.
100%. This is where, this range of draft picks, they're going to be there for a reason. And maybe the landing spot isn't necessarily what we wanted for these guys. Maybe the draft capital wasn't necessarily, like, if Luther Burden falls to like late second round in the NFL draft and doesn't get a phenomenal landing spot, like you could see him in this range. And I could see people saying, hey, I would rank Chris Olave ahead of Luther Burden. I'd rank Jalen Waddle ahead of Luther Burden. Like there's a couple other players that could happen with too. And who knows, like, we want to put our rose-colored glasses on and say that all of these players are going to go to the best, most ideal landing spot. But sometimes the NFL just kills some of these players with landing spot decisions. But we know what we have in Chris Olave. It's just, can he stay healthy with all the concussions? We know what we have in Jalen Waddle. It's just, can the offense return to, being more high-powered, to, throwing more downfield? I think these two wide receivers specifically are guys that have an opportunity to really regain and rebound a lot of value. It's just, do you believe in them and their ability to regain that value, or would you rather take the rookie? I think that's a very interesting conversation there.
So I love Josh Downs in this range. I think right now in the Dynasty landscape, he's overall wide receiver 42. He's definitely feeling a little undervalued to me. As somebody that lives in Indiana, there's already talks about extension for Josh Downs, because if you look at his overall stats, 9.2 fantasy points per game as a rookie, went up to 13.1 and his sophomore campaign, was a top 30 wide receiver on a points per game basis. Still got over 100 targets, even though he only played in 14 games. I understand there's kind of the worry of Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, but I think going forward, I think Josh Downs is 100% someone that I want to be taking a shot at, especially when you're able to trade kind of the unknown early second round pick for a guy like Josh Downs. Of course, if I could take Chris Olave or Jalen Waddle, I'm taking them over Josh Downs right now. But I think Josh Downs in this range is someone that really intrigues me.
I wanted to ask you about Khalil Shakir in here, because I was going to ask you about Jaden Reed, but he was highlighted in your rebuilding players video, so we can link that up at the top if you guys want to go check out Caleb's bigger breakdown on why you should be buying Jaden Reed right now. But I threw Khalil Shakir in here, and I think Khalil Shakir is a very interesting name because Buffalo is still a place where a round 2 wide receiver is being mocked to them, whether you're talking about if it's Trey Harris, if it's Jaden Higgins, one of these kind of more X receivers in this class. And that might hurt Khalil Shakir's value, but he also just re-signed that massive contract. He, basically is the wide receiver 1 for that team. Are you in on Shakir obviously as a rebuilding asset, but I even would be tempted to throw him in if I was competing. He might be a better long-term play with very similar production to a Davante Adams, to a Mike Evans, maybe ahead of Chris Godwin, especially when you factor in the longevity of him still being like 25, 26.
I think it's crazy when we look at kind of the long-term outlook of what we look at with Khalil Shakir, because he is only 25 years old. But even more, when you look at him when he came into the league, it was like, hey, he's like a downfield, field stretcher type wide receiver. And then all of a sudden we see him really last year absolutely thrive in the slot. And I think there is the concern that there are a lot of mouths to feed here in the Buffalo Bills offense that are kind of all in the same range. Dalton Kincaid disappointed last season. You still got Keon Coleman. But Khalil Shakir, as you were saying, got the huge extension going forward. So if I am somebody that needs some proven production tied to Josh Allen, this guy can only go up, in my personal opinion, because he's sliding in as wide receiver 41 over on Keep Trade Cut. And I understand there's risk if they draft another wide receiver. If Keon Coleman takes that year 2 jump that a lot of people expect him to make, maybe Dalton Kincaid bounces back in year 3. There's only so much targets to go around. I still think Khalil Shakir, he's the most dominant wide receiver that they currently have, and the only really wide receiver that's shown consistent production. And so I agree with you. I think in this list, he's probably the player that I would say kind of fit in both the competing bucket and the rebuilding bucket.
Moving on to the more mid-second round, the 205 to the 2.08 range. If we're looking at competing assets that you could buy with these kind of picks, we're looking at a James Conner, we're looking at a Juwan Jennings, a Mark Andrews, David Njoku. I threw Cortland Sutton in here as well because I just think that even though Denver seems like a very popular mocked team for a wide receiver to go to, they definitely need wide receiver help or even one of these top tight ends. I still think Cortland Sutton, at least for 2025, is still probably going to come out as the wide receiver 1 on this team. Caleb, I wanted to throw this to you. You've been on the Mark Andrews train for a hot minute now, and I have been as well. But do you kind of want to talk about why we should still be buying into Mark Andrews? Because I feel like some people, really got soured on Andrews' production, especially at the beginning of the year, but double-digit touchdowns, still a pretty solid tight end. Like, you're still buying in for sure.
Oh, easily. At these prices, I think you have to be buying in on Mark Andrews. And I think the issue that continues to arise in this dynasty landscape is past Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. Yes, of course, there's guys that we love, these young tight ends that are coming in, even some guys like on the fringe, like a David Njoku. But Mark Andrews is, in my opinion, still Mark Andrews. I understand he's 29. He'll be turning 30 this year. So there's a little bit of the age concerns going forward. We saw a little bit of less explosion this last year, but the main reason I'm looking at him not being as explosive this last season was really just him coming off that injury. And if you're considering like the historical comps when you're talking about, of course, like coming off a fibula injury, like the year after is not usually the year that you want to be betting on that explosion coming back. And so for me, I'm looking at him and I still view him as someone that can get to being back to being a dominant tight end. And like you were saying, the touchdowns are still there for Mark Andrews. Just going forward, it needs to get back to that elite level target share that he had in 2022, which I understand when you're looking at the Baltimore Ravens offense that there are a lot more mouths to feed, and we'll have to see if they do anything in the draft. They bring in someone like a DeAndre Hopkins, who honestly at this point is pretty washed in my personal opinion. You got Zay Flowers heading into year 3. But I like some Mark Andrews. I know everyone was all over Isaiah Likely at the beginning of the season, kind of taking the mantle from Mark Andrews. But I do believe Mark Andrews is going to take the mantle back. As much as there's some people that love buying into a guy like a George Kittle, I think you could get Mark Andrews at a little bit of a cheaper value. And there's a little bit more longevity there just based on his overall age.
James Conner is the only running back in this range that we have from a competing standpoint. I know that he signed that 2-year extension, but I still feel like he is... I mean, he has been for a couple of years, basically ever since he joined Arizona. He's just been an undervalued but extremely productive running back. Caleb, are you still in on buying a James Conner for a mid-second round pick if you're competing?
Oh, easily. I was trying to buy James Conner all offseason because as much as I'm not the biggest like Alvin Kamara guy right now, I'm a little bit worried about him. I am worried about James Conner because we all know that once these running backs hit that 28-year-old age mark, the wheels eventually fall off. But as we saw with Derrick Henry last year, sometimes these guys, they just got a little bit of extra juice. And I believe James Conner just continues to have it. He had that early career crazy sickness that he was able to overcome. Major shout out to James Conner. But after that, I mean, the last 3 seasons, RB9, RB13, and then last season, RB15 on a points per game basis. And that was in a really, really depleted Cardinals offense where people were screaming and shouting for Kyler Murray to perform better, for Marvin Harrison Jr. to perform better. But James Conner just kind of goes out and does his thing. And so if you can get essentially anywhere between RB18 or better points per game value, and you're only having to trade a mid-second, like sign me the heck up. I think James Conner is a great contending buy if you need some RB help on your Dynasty team.
I have a video coming out later in the week that is going to be hyping up some Jawan Jennings. So I won't go really into him all that much. So we can move on to the rebuilding side of it because we got James Conner's teammate. We got Trey Benson in this range if you are looking for kind of like a rebuilding asset with a mid-second. And then we also have Jalen McMillan. I know he just kind of got killed by Chris Godwin re-signing there, but I still think that we've seen enough from Jalen McMillan. And even still with some of the uncertainty around Godwin's injury, Mike Evans continues to get older. Eventually Father Time has to win, but when that is, I don't necessarily know, but I still feel like I saw enough from Jalen McMillan that I'm still willing to buy into him for 2026, 2027. If you get anything in 2025, then that I think is just a cherry on top. Caleb, do you have any feelings on either one of these two players specifically?
As much as I just hyped up James Conner, Addison, I absolutely loved from Trey Benson. I loved him as a prospect. I mean, when you're talking about a running back that stands at 6 foot tall and can run a 4.39 40-yard dash time, sign me the heck up. Super explosive. Now, did not beat out, and I think a lot of people, when you get that early 3rd round draft capital, you kind of assume, hey, maybe by midseason, maybe by the end of the season, you would start to see Trey Benson get a little bit more of that snap share, get a little bit more of that opportunity. That didn't happen last season, but when he did get in the game, you definitely saw some of those explosive characteristics. So I think heading into year 2, being able to get a running back like a Trey Benson, who last offseason was going in the early part of the second, you get a little bit of a year dip, a year gap where you're able to then get him in the middle of the second round by trading one of those picks away. That's 100% something that I'm willing to do and absolutely love Trey Benson going forward. Because like we said, with James Conner, potentially a father time is going to come into play. I just don't see how the Arizona Cardinals, of course, it's a loaded draft class where there's a chance they take another running back just to shore up the running back room. but I don't think they take somebody in round 2 or round 3. And that would kind of be the only thing that would scare me off of potentially Trey Benson and his overall value cratering. Now, moving on to the late seconds, 209 to 212. If you're competing, some guys that we think are great trade targets would be a Tony Pollard, a Ramondre Stevenson, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Jonnu Smith. So I want to throw the ball over to you, Addison, and let's talk through these running backs at first, because as we know, people are hyping up and saying, hey, there's 15 to 18 running backs that can get drafted in like the top 5 rounds. And so as you're comparing maybe getting one of those guys versus a guy like a Tony Pollard or Ramondre Stevenson, kind of how you valuing that on value purposes, but also for longevity's sake when it comes to like a guy like a Tony Pollard or Ramondre Stevenson on a contending team.
I think the second round is a very interesting range this year for running back specifically, because we've been propping up basically the top 5 guys as they're all, pretty easily in the first round of rookie drafts. And then you have this kind of like grouping of everybody else that is interesting, but we're going to have to wait to see what the NFL draft basically tells us and how the NFL views all these guys. When you're talking about like Scadaboo, Martinez, DJ Giddens, Devin Neal, Bashal Tutin, I mean, the list goes on and on with all these other names, that the second round has kind of almost become, at least in early ADP pre-draft, a weird like dead zone of you have some of these other wide receivers that we want to, prop up there just because of how bad the wide receiver class is. You still have maybe a quarterback or two in Jalen Milroe, and then maybe another interesting name gets thrown in there like Tyler Shuck or something like that. Still maybe a tight end or two. And then like these running backs are just kind of weird. Like we want to put Scadaboo in there somewhere, but then we're not really sure. Then we want to put, DJ Giddens or Damian Martinez in there, but we're not really sure. And so if you're looking for just a running back that's going to produce for you in 2025, assuming that this is your late second round pick and, you were a hardcore contender, made it to the second round, maybe even made it to the championship, maybe even won, and you're looking for that little extra something at the running back position to help you compete again in 2025, I think Pollard and Ramondre can do that. I feel pretty confident in both of their abilities to survive the NFL draft. Ramondre just got paid. Tony Pollard got paid last year. Interesting fact about the Titans, they only have two picks in the first 3 rounds, one of which is obviously the first overall pick. And then I don't think they're going to use, the first pick in the second round to do anything with either. So they have only day 3 picks essentially to draft any running backs with. I don't even know if they necessarily go with it because they still got Spears behind Pollard. Ramondre is kind of in the same boat where they just paid him. They paid Antonio Gibson last year. I think both these guys survived the draft, and I think they both are pretty solid bets for 1,000-yard seasons in 2025 that you can get for super cheap, add on to your depth for a RB3, RB4, RB5 with that second round pick that you have. And, I think you'd be looking a lot better after they survive the NFL draft, come out clean on the other end, and you got a team RB1.
Now, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised to see Christian Kirk's name kind of making this list. And to be honest, as much as we've talked through like some of these other free agent landing spots and some other trades that happened right around that time, the Christian Kirk news kind of went under the radar. And so when you're looking at Christian Kirk sliding in alongside a guy like CJ Stroud, how are you viewing Christian Kirk? I understand this is a competing roster, so we, of course, are looking at Christian Kirk as maybe giving you some wide receiver 3 weeks, but can he be better than that? I think that's the thing that I've been debating in my own rankings as we're kind of approaching the NFL draft of, hey, Christian Kirk sliding in the slot next to Nico Collins. We also have to remember Stephon Diggs is out of there. Christian Kirk being the wide receiver 2 for CJ Stroud is kind of an interesting little dilemma.
That's exactly how I'm looking at it, is that he is the wide receiver 2. I'm sure maybe they add somebody, I think like if they draft Emeka Ibuka and pair him back with CJ Stroud, I feel like that would really kill Christian Kirk because I feel like they overlap a lot. But if it's, somebody like a Matthew Golden or a Kyle Williams or one of these more like kind of wide receivers, and then you got Christian Kirk just running in the slot, like I think that could be a very interesting play where he is just somebody who I think could be like Jacoby Myers, or remember like that year that we got from Kendrick Bourne like 2 years ago from the Patriots, like something kind of like that, where he's a very favorable target for CJ Stroud. And I think that he's better than Dalton Schultz. He's obviously better than John Mechie and anybody, Xavier Hutchinson, whoever else they have there. And I would say to anybody who's like, well, why would they use him? They paid a 7th round pick for him. they paid a 7th round pick for Joe Mixon, and they used the crap out of him last year. So I think that Houston has definitely, at least they showed last year with Joe Mixon, that they're, on board with sending away 6th and 7th round picks to players that might get cut for contracts that are expiring and then still end up using that player. And I think that's exactly where Christian Kirk can find himself. And like you said, has been kind of going under the radar in terms of finding a new home. And he's never going to be like what he was in 2022, but that doesn't mean he can't still be a good asset for us now.
And according to Pro Football Network, the Houston Texans have the worst offensive line right now in football. And they're not really going to, unless they address it in the first round of the NFL draft, which we think they're going to take another wide receiver potentially or another weapon. That's going to mean CJ Stroud's going to be under duress frequently and often. And what is the first look for a lot of quarterbacks when they're under duress? It's going to be that slot wide receiver. So I'm right there with you, Addison. I think Christian Kirk is an absolutely great value. Now, talking through Evan Ingram too, that's another guy that a lot of people have been hyping up because the Denver Broncos, as much as we love a guy like a Bo Nix and a Sean Payton, there's a lot of hype there for a guy like Evan Ingram who's shown to be fantasy football relevant, especially if you need some tight end production year in and year out. Over the last 3 seasons, he's finished as at least a tight end 12 in points per game. It's actually been closer to the tight end 7 to tight end 4 over the last 3 seasons. Wanted your opinion on how did you like that landing spot? And then, of course, if you can trade a late second, especially if it's a tight end premium league, to go get some tight end production.
Everybody's initial reaction to that was, we got the Joker position for Sean Payton's offense, and Evan Ingram's going to get hyper targeted and blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to go that far, but I still think that obviously that landing spot was phenomenal. We know Sean Payton's history with tight ends, not even just Jimmy Graham, but you look at like Jared Cook did really well there for fantasy football at like his mid 30s age. Ben Watson had a season with the Saints where he was doing pretty well. Evan Ingram sliding in there, even if he is a little bit older, I think that he kind of like Christian Kirk is essentially, I think, the second best option on the team right now. And even though the Broncos are very highly mocked in terms of getting another wide receiver, that it just might be a thing where in 2025, Ingram is the trusted go-to veteran for Bo Nix. And I feel like that offense desperately kind of needs that more so than they need a really downfield field stretcher to replace like Marvin Mims or somebody like that. Like I feel like we saw how often they used like Devon Vele last year. They just needed somebody other than Cortland Sutton. And I think Evan Ingram fills that slot very nicely for the team. And yeah, if you can buy somebody that I think could basically just replicate what he's been doing in Jacksonville, just in Denver, easy late second round pick for a starting fantasy tight end.
Then we kind of move it on to the rebuilding trade targets for one of these late seconds. Guys like a Tank Dell, Jalen Wright, Brenton Strange, and Ben Sinnott. I want to start it off by talking about Tank Dell, Addison. And I think there's a lot of people in the space that still have hope for a guy like Tank Dell. And then there's a lot of people that are kind of starting to throw Tank Dell to the wayside. I think I'm starting to not want to buy into Tank Dell at this current moment, just because we know we have to wait a full season. And then by then, what is that going to look like? What other wide receivers potentially are the Houston Texans going to be investing in? What are your kind of thoughts and opinions on Tank Dell? Because of course we loved his rookie season. We loved the hype going into year 2, coming off the injury, but then kind of just going into not even really going to play in year 3. So we're going to almost have to punt to year 4 with Tank Dell.
Yeah, that is the hard part, is that he's not going to play this year, projected not going to play this year. Then he's going to be year 4. He's going to be going into a contract year. And then what's he going to do off the injury? Are they going to re-sign him? Is he going to go somewhere else and play on a second team? It is difficult, and I do understand that, but I still think I saw enough from Tank Dell, obviously as a rookie, but then, he kind of had that same kind of, fibula broken injury that Mark Andrews had, that Tony Pollard had. And I feel like that's a big reason for why he had that slower start. Plus, Stephon Diggs kind of made a name for himself early on, which I think allowed Tank Dell to have that slower start because he wasn't as needed for the Texans offense. But then we saw, he was doing pretty well to end the year. And even the game that he got hurt in was having a pretty bonkers game. That I still believe that if Tank Dell can be good, and I feel like he could be one of those guys that takes that really cheap, like prove it deal to stay with Houston, to do it again in 2027. And so we might have a little bit of longevity with him. I still think that he's really talented. And especially if you're looking for wide receivers as a rebuilding team, I don't think that this class is going to give you a Tank Dell kind of asset in this kind of late second round pick, or at least it's going to be somebody that maybe it's a late day 2, maybe it's even a day 3 pick at this point, given the wide receiver class that I just don't think you're going to feel confident in. And it might just be smarter to move over to a Tank Dell and just see where we're at in 2026.
So I need us to talk through Brenton Strange, because as I was sitting at my desk working, and then I got that Evan Ingram news right around free agency, I got up and did a little bit of a boogie because I was so excited for all of my Brenton Strange shares. And I said, the time is now for Brenton Strange to absolutely emerge in the dynasty landscape. Now, a lot of people seem to forget that he was drafted in the second round of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I don't know what it is. I think he's a big athletic tight end, and that seems to be my MO in the dynasty landscape. But as we're looking through, I mean, when Evan Ingram was out at the beginning of last season, he didn't perform too shabby. And now you add in the fact that you got Liam Cohen coming in to call the shots. Of course, everyone's excited for Brian Thomas Jr. We're also excited to see, do they address the wide receiver position in the draft as well? I just think Brenton Strange was the overall winner of Evan Ingram leaving, because I think he was even going to be pushing Evan Ingram a little bit this season if Evan Ingram had stayed on the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I want your opinion, Addison. Are you as high on Brenton Strange as I am, or am I just living on a pipe dream?
Well, first of all, I mean, you're asking a Penn State fan if I'm high on Brenton Strange. Obviously, obviously I'm high on Brenton Strange. But yes, no, you are correct. I mean, if you just look at his game log, he didn't do anything in week 1. I mean, first game of his entire career, but from week 2 to week 5, so 4-game sample size. I mean, he was on a 17-game pace of 51 receptions for 510 yards and 9 touchdowns. And that was in place of Evan Ingram. And then he even had a game later on in the year where he had 12 targets for 11 receptions and 73 yards. I think Ingram was out for that one again, and that was a Mac Jones game, kind of when like everybody was hurt, and it was really just BTJ and then like Brenton Strange playing for Mac Jones. But so, I mean, he showed that he could do it again later on in the season. I feel like he's just, especially in that Liam Cohen offense, I think that he's better than Cade Otton, and we saw what Otton was able to do, like when Evans was kind of hurt, and then when Godwin was hurt and everybody else like that I feel like Brenton Strange is that bet at tight end that you make to just ascend into being a top 10 dynasty tight end, like this year's Tucker Kraft, like the guy that we wanted Dalton Kincaid to be last year. I think that is the path that Brenton Strange is currently on.
So I wanted to kind of continue talking about this, because in the same breath, we have Ben Sinnott, who is in the same range on keep trade cut. So I think me and you are probably both in the same agreement. We're taking Brenton Strange 10 out of 10 times over Ben Sinnott right now. But I want to see, what do you think of Ben Sinnott going forward? We see Zach Ertz resigned to the Washington Commanders. So of course we're like, oh, he was the trusty security blanket for Jaden Daniels. How are you viewing Ben Sinnott going forward? Is there still hope? Is it alive? Should we actually be trading a late second for Ben Sinnott?
I think we absolutely should. I mean, he's a phenomenal prospect. In my tight end marker system, he graded out as the very easy tight end 2 in last year's class, obviously behind Brock Bowers. But I mean, he was up there, man. Like, he was a very quality tight end prospect drafted in the round 2. And, it's so easy. Like, every time you say Ben Sinnott and then you're saying, well, Zach Ertz, well, it's like, Ertz destroyed Trey McBride. He destroyed Dallas Goedert. And then once he was removed from the equation, those two took off. Trey McBride, especially, now the highest paid tight end in NFL history. But I mean, Sinnott, he just needs that opportunity, man. And I think that is the one differentiator between him and Brenton Strange. I think Strange is a very good tight end prospect too. And obviously showed it when Evan Ingram was off the field and now gets the, offensive system upgrade. He has that opportunity immediately. Ben Sinnott needs to still hurdle over Zach Ertz, but I think once he does, I think that we're obviously going to be very excited for him once Zach Ertz is out of the equation. But then I think a few games in, he's going to show us immediately why we should have been buying him for late second round picks if you can still do that right now.
If you're interested in seeing where some of these picks would be with potential landing spots, tune in to this mock draft that Addison did a few days ago, as well as hit that like and subscribe button for us on the way out. We're on the way to 20,000 subscribers here on the DLF YouTube channel. We appreciate you guys so much, and we will catch you on the next one.